Hi there, thanks for tuning in again. Thought I'd do something a bit different for my latest video, copied games. Now, if you're a kid that grew up in the 80s, you'll remember these, especially if you owned a Spectrum or a Commodore 64 or even an Amstrad. And it's one of those things that we do laugh and joke about these days. Piracy obviously is still rampant, but a different type of piracy to back then. You could say it was easier back then, or in some ways it was harder to pirate games, but it certainly did go on, and I think anybody that owned one of those aforementioned computers and didn't own a pirated game at some point is either an extremely honourable person or telling porky pies, because it was one of those things, especially in the playgrounds, we all did. So what I've done, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, or those that just want to go on a little nostalgia trip back to the 80s, I've selected a few blank cassettes with data on them for the purpose of this video. I'm going to show you a few of them now so we can have a look through the different examples that existed back in the day. So first of all, I'm going to have a look at this one here. As you can see, this is very neatly filled out, this one. Very helpfully gives you the instructions as well, or some of the instructions. This would have always been very important back in the day, because a lot of games, they didn't tell you what keys were required once you loaded the game up. Obviously, if you had a pirated copy, you didn't have the original manual, so you couldn't refer to that. There was no internet to Google the answer, so this is actually quite a sensible thing that this chap's done here, or girl of course, with the controls for each game. So you've got jetpack controls there, and 3D Combat Zone controls there, and obviously one game on each side. And he's also rather helpfully written on the spine as well, so quite a thorough pirate here. Whether this was something that someone was selling in the playground or at a market stall, or whether they just did it themselves, copied it off a friend's copy of Jetpack or 3D Combat Zone, is unknown, but anyway, a fairly nice effort. And as you will see here, it's what was commonly known as a C15, so 7.5 minutes on each side. So there was no way that was any use for music, or very little use for music, and as you can see, it was a computer cassette. That's how these were sold. So that's the first example there. Second example, I've included this one because I remember having these Altai cassettes when I was a kid. A lot of obviously independent producers of these cassettes out there, and this is another 15-minute one, two 7.5-minute sides, and this is the US Gold adaptation of Gauntlet on here, and you've got the main game on one side and the extra levels on the other. I'm not sure if that's the deeper dungeons or whether it's just more levels, but anyway, so there you got Gauntlet on there. And this is an example of another company producing these computer cassettes called Capital, never heard of them. And this is The Hobbit, which of course was the famous adventure by Melbourne House, and there's even a one-word review there of The Hobbit. Great, indeed it is great. Lovely graphic adventure, 1982 I think it was. And on the other side it looks like Jetpack again. So there you go, that's another example. Something that people might find astonishing, but actually a lot of computer game retailers would sell these cassettes as well, which seems a bit odd when essentially they were giving their customers the means for which to copy their own product, which you would have thought they'd be too keen on. So here we have WH Smith's, John Menzies and Boots. Now these were the three, in the UK anyway, these were the three main retailers of certainly Spectrum games, where I bought my games when I was a nipper. So you've got WH Smith here with their computer cassette, and inside, let's have a look. Yeah, nothing written on that, so I'll be interested to load that up and see if there's actually anything recorded on there. Then you've got John Menzies with a C12, so I presume that that's only 6 minutes each side, and also that's helpfully been batch tested as well, whatever that means. And there's the cassette inside, and you can see there we've got Frogger, helpfully telling you how to load it, and Speed Duel. And then finally we've got this Boots C15, which actually is still sealed as well. So nothing on that one at all, presumably. Excuse me. Nothing on that one at all, presumably. So yeah, that's another example of these retailers selling the means with which to pirate their own products with. And then we've got a couple more examples here. We've got a C15 from actually it just says computer cassette on it, and it's blank on the inside as well. Oh, there's some info here, I think. Leholm Audio Services Limited. So I'm not quite sure what who they are, but that was another example there. And EMI tape, so of course EMI big manufacturer, but in on it themselves. Let's have a look what's on this one, shall we? Wheelie by the look of it, and Pyjamarama. So a couple of famous games there for the Spectrum. So the way you would do this, basically you'd need a stereo which had 2 cassette decks, which was, while not exactly common in the early 80s, by the mid 80s and late 80s it was quite common. So you'd put your game cassette in one of the cassette players, and then you'd put the blank one on the other. You'd simply press play on this, record on this one, and away you go. You'd obviously have to wait a few minutes while it did it, so it wasn't exactly the quickest way of copying, but then when it was finished loading, so to speak, or running, you press stop and there you go. Hey presto, you'd have a copied game. So not really too difficult to do. Now the last example here is maybe something that is a little bit more suspect. Obviously copying your own games is one thing, kids mucking around is another, but I think this is most probably an example of a commercial pirate. In other words, someone that was making them in batches and selling them commercially, whether at a market or mail order or whatever. So this, as you can see, it's from Big K, which was a computer game magazine back in the day. And if we just have a look at the spine first, you can see that it's quite neatly typed there, Blade Alley and Pogo. It's unlikely that a school child would go to the effort of doing that, or even have the ability to do that either. And then we look at the cassette itself. Again, it's typed on there, Pogo, Blade Alley, and indeed there's another game on there by the look of it, Android. So this would have been the sort of endeavour that would have driven software houses mad, because it's actually someone probably running off quite a few copies and then selling them at a fraction of the price that they were trying to sell them at. So yeah, I think that's a commercial effort of it. C15s and C12s were one thing, but the thing that we all had as well were C60s and C90s. Now these were generally cassettes that were higher grade, and they were used obviously in music as well, because you could fit like whole albums on it. So you'd end up with something like this. This is a TDK CD C90, and basically you could fit loads of games on it. And a lot of this went on as well, where you were copying over games and putting new games on all the time, trying not to mess up each one. So this is quite familiar to me, seeing something like this, and you can fit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. They've got over a dozen games on here. So with one cassette, you could basically have loads of hit games. So as you can imagine, these sort of cassettes were quite popular and got passed around. And of course, once you had one of those double cassette hi-fis, you could just put one of these and then another one next to it and press record, and 40 minutes later you had 6 games. Flip it and then do the other side, and you've got a whole cassette's worth of games. So there you go, that's the first example. Another C90 here by a company called Flight, by the look of it. So lots of games on here, Mountains of Ket. And here what the pirater has done, or the copier has done, is helpfully put down the tape counter numbers. So you could forward wind to the counter on your tape cassette player to each one to work out whether you're in the right place to load that particular game. A special pack 2, is that, or Z? Not sure on that one, but anyway, lots more games on this one. This is a cassette from Sony, and as you can see, it's quite a hi-fi, sci-fi looking cassette. Crystal Gamma, it says. So this would have been purchased presumably still from Boots or somewhere like that. And the games on here, you've got Beachhead 2, Academy from CRL, Checkered Flag again, so quite a different range of games. You've got older games and new games. A couple of interesting ones. Tazword 2, not sure why you'd whack a word processor on there, but it's there anyway. Heavy on the Magic, Desert Rats, Advance to the Border, Initiations. I'm not sure whether that's about Desert Rats or whether it's another game. And then we've got a few interesting ones here. Battle Axe 2, never heard of that. Alamein 3, I presume that's another strategy game or something. Batman, Spin Dizzy, and the Boggett, round that one off. So quite a lot of gaming excitement there. This is probably the one which you could justify, because looking at the games, titles, they look very generic, and that's because they're all typing games. Now, of course, what a typing game was, in case you don't know, is it was a listing in a magazine or in a book, which you would type into your computer, usually in BASIC, and then you basically have a game. Excuse the pun. Now what you would want to do, so you didn't have to keep typing it in every time you want to play that game, you would save it to tape. So that's what this person has done, and they've helpfully labelled it typing games. So this isn't pirating per se, it's they've typed these games out and then saved them onto cassette so they could play them whenever they wanted without having to type it all out. This is another one. It's got the games listed on a separate bit of paper. So we've got a BASF tape, and then if you look on these two bits of paper, two scraps of paper, helpfully telling you how to load it again, but you've got all the games here. Another few interesting ones: Adventure 1, Doomsday Castle, Glug Glug and Beaky and the Egg Snatchers I've heard of, the others I haven't, so I'll be quite interested to load these up and have a look at them. And then I believe this is a little bit of notepad paper, is side 2. So if we have a look at side 2, we've got Black Crystal, Plunder, Inca Curse, The Golden Apple, Sorcerer's Castle and Night Gunner. So quite a few adventures there, so this guy was obviously a bit of an adventurer fan. I wonder if the Sorcerer's Castle, I wonder if that's the Sorcerer Claymore Castle, whether that's a different one. Anyway, there you go, that's the BASF cassette. And then finally, this is one of the ones I really like to get when I buy a bundle of Spectrum games. You usually get something like this, and it's quite intriguing. So it's Dixon's, so another retailer selling one of these. Dixon's DX90 cassette, so presumably 45 minutes each side again, and it's just rather enigmatically games copyright, which is a bit ironic, I think, on the part of whoever wrote that. And on the flip side, Machine Code Tutor. So what is this? This is intriguing. This makes me wonder whether this is the Machine Code Tutor, and the flip side is games created with the Machine Code Tutor, or whether it's a bunch of pirated games. Don't know really, so I'll be quite interested in finding out on that one. So that's one of the nice things about picking up these Spectrum bundles. You always get little curiosities like that, which are fun to load up and find out what's going on. So there you go, there's my quick rundown on pirated games in the 80s, specifically on the Spectrum. Thanks for watching, and I'll post another video soon. Cheers, bye.